Hello everyone, Taylor Drake here with New Horizons Ministries. Thanks for joining me for an impromptu film review. I had the opportunity to see an unfinished product of Paul, the Apostle of Christ, which is coming out March 28th, just in time for Easter weekend. The film stars Jim Caviezel as Luke, Olivier Martinez as Martius, and James Faulkner as Paul. It was written and directed by Andrew Hyatt, who also wrote and directed Full of Grace, which covers the last few days of Mary, mother of Jesus, before her earthly death. And it's kind of appropriate because this film covers the last week or so of the life of Paul. The basic story is Paul is dying, Luke is sneaking into the prison and beginning to write down the book of Acts. Now, a lot more happens in the film. It's almost 2 hours long, and if that was all that was happening, it'd be rather boring. But we get to meet Priscilla and Aquila, and as they, the married couple, helping to harbor persecuted Christians during the time of Nero, who is martyring them and persecuting them and putting them into his circus in the Colosseum, we get to watch their marital relationship as they wrestle with what they should be doing for the kingdom of God. But then we also get to meet Martius and his wife. Martius is the Roman soldier who's actually in charge of the prison and over a group of soldiers as well. And their relationship as their daughter is dying and why they're praying to their gods isn't healing her. So when somebody asks me what makes a good film, it can't just be the message. A lot of people say that Christian films have a really good message, and ultimately they're correct. Christ is risen and he loves you, and you can overcome any of your problems and issues, that's not why Jesus is here. He's not here to make your life better, but that you can know the love of God, and that by changing your outlook of life and your worldview, it changes who you are, what you do, and how you respond. So when somebody asks me what makes a good film, it can't just be the message. It also has to be the cinematography, the editing, the production design, the costuming. And with the Academy Awards just a short ways away, these things are really prominent in my mind. So was this a good film? Well, most Christian films have poor production value, bad scripts, are rather preachy. The characters aren't really human. You don't really relate to any of them. You get what they're doing and you're glad they're doing it, but for the most part, it's not a good film. I am glad to say that this was a solid film with a lot of biblical Easter eggs. Biblical Easter eggs. What I mean by that is that if you're familiar with the biblical passages in the New Testament, you're going to hear a lot of references to Timothy and Ephesus and Christ and everything that he does, and it's really cool to be able to pick up on those things. This was a solid film. I was actually surprised at it wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to be. Clearly, they had a lot more money, they had a better cast, the script was decently done, and I was pleased to say I enjoyed the film. It was good. Now, like most Christian films, this is a very emotional film, but that's mainly because we automatically relate to the material. We understand to a certain degree what it means to be persecuted in America, but not like this persecution. So there's two things that I want to talk about. I'm not going to ruin the film with any spoilers like Paul dying, which he does, and spoiler alert, Paul dies. But two things that I want to address and look at real quick. The first is this. There's two shots that I really appreciate. The very first shot in the film is actually of Paul, but we don't see his face. It's what we call a God shot, where the camera is above the character looking down on him. And this is looking down at him at an angle. And it goes like this. His shirt is open, there's dust and dirt and grime everywhere, it's yellow and tan, and he's clearly in prison, and his shirt is open on the back, and we see fresh whip marks, and he's still bleeding. And the very first line of dialogue in the film is this: "Is there nothing more?" which is spoken by Paul. Now, when we think of Paul, we think of this great, towering theological giant, a man who puts Peter in his place, who is the first real missionary of Christianity, spreading it across the Roman Empire, setting up churches and planting churches in a variety of cities, who writes so much of the New Testament. He is one of the dominating figures in the New Testament. And I was actually really glad that the film humanized him. They demythologized him. This is Paul at the end of his life, who is filled with regret, not for being a Christian, but for everything he did before he was a Christian. In fact, we are privy to several of his dreams when he is surrounded by the men and women and children who he killed, who were Christians. The next shot is going to be the introduction of Luke. Now, we meet a hooded figure, and he's walking down a hallway with torches on the side. And as he's walking down, the camera's following behind him. He turns a corner, goes down some stairs, and that brings him outside onto this Roman street. It's at night, and there's lights coming from the walls outside, and we see some Roman gentlemen harming and abusing this character. And as Luke walks by, two Roman soldiers walk towards him. He stops and turns around. We finally see his face. It's Jim Caviezel playing not Jesus. And as he walks away, we see that the man who the Roman guards were abusing and harming is being put up on a stake, and liquid is being thrown on him. The camera then looks up, and we see that the lights that are lining the street are not torches, but are Christians who have been torched. The camera then looks over at Luke's character, and he is terrified. This was a great job of setting up the film and letting us know what's happening. Nero is abusing and blaming Christians for the burning and the sacking of Rome and everything that's going on. The film takes place in AD 67, and again, it's over the last couple weeks of Paul's life. This is an emotional film. Most films by Christians are emotional, but man, this was heavy. Not as emotional as The Passion of the Christ, which is kind of the textbook go-to Christian film now, but this is a fictitious account. It's not real. This didn't happen. To the best of our knowledge, it didn't happen. But it does a really good job of taking the biblical narratives, kind of filling in the gap, and then letting the audience chew on what's happening and what's going on. The takeaway line that I want to give to you is this. Paul, when being asked by Martius why he was willing to die for his faith, is this: men do not die for things they doubt. This is an emotional film. It's an encouraging film. This is a good, well-made film. And I encourage you to go see it when it comes out on March 28th, just in time for Easter weekend. Not because it's perfectly theologically sound. I'm sure you're going to have some issues with it. I had some theological, squibbles, but it's a film and it's art. My encouragement to you is go see it, because this is a good indication of where biblical Christian films are going. That they're going to get more money. They're going to get bigger stars. There's going to be better production, and this was a good film. I look forward to seeing it again in theaters when it's finished, to see if they did all the changes. There's a boom mic in a shot, and they took it out, so hopefully they take it out. Thanks for joining me. Please, I encourage you to go see Paul, the Apostle of Christ, coming out March 28th, starring Jim Caviezel as Luke, James Faulkner as Paul, and Olivier Martinez as Martius. As always, thanks for listening. Blessings, and have a good day. See you next time.